else.
Oh, but then I tried it from the agenda too. I couldn't get through with the agenda.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Planning Board meeting for March 28th, 2023. I'm Carrie Martinek, Chair of the Planning Board. Before we get started, I have a few announcements to read. This open meeting of the Planning Board is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, an act relative extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law on July 16, 2022. All members of the Planning Board are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The act allows the Planning Board to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link listed on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. And now I'd like to confirm members anticipated on the agenda are remotely present and can be heard. Members, and I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Bill Pierce?
Here.
Anthony Zaitin?
Here.
Millie Milton?
Here.
Amy Pretsky?
Here.
Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Lori Connors?
Here.
Ground rules for the meeting. For presenters and applicants on the agenda, the chair will invite each speaker or applicant on the agenda by name to make a presentation and speak to their application. Participants will provide their full name and hold until their name is called. Each speaker will be asked to mute their phone or computer when not speaking and speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate meeting minutes. Those responding will be asked to wait until the floor is yielded to them by the chair. Speakers who wish to respond to the comments of others do so through the chair, taking care to identify themselves. Each vote taken by the board will be conducted by roll call vote. For items of public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will forward public comments as follows. By phone, dial *9 to raise your hand and wait to be recognized by the chair. Please note party phone number will be visible to those viewing the meeting. By Zoom, click raise hand on the bottom of your screen and wait to be recognized by the chair. The chair will ask members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and addresses only. Once the chair has a list of all public commentators, the chair will call on each by name and afford approximately 3 minutes for any comments. So with that, why don't we get started with our agenda? On the agenda this evening is the continued public hearing for the property known as 0 and 301 Bartlett Street, Parcel H, for site plan approval and a groundwater protection overlay district special permit for development of a distribution center and warehouse project. I'm going to bring in the parties now. All right, and I think everyone's coming on board here. Okay. I think, is that everybody, Attorney Donahue? I have Kelly Jordan Price, Israel, Scott, David Robinson, you. Am I missing anyone?
You have Attorney Price? Is that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Is that everyone?
I'll check on David Robinson, but if you don't see him, I'll check on him.
Okay, David is there. Looks like a name. I don't know if he's.
I'm here. I'm here.
All right, great. And Attorney Dineski, we have you as well, looks like. Oops, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining. All right, so we last left off, Attorney Donahue, I assume you were caught up to speed from the last hearing, and tonight's
I had the chance to watch it all.
Oh, good. We missed you last week.
Missed you too.
So tonight's job is to kind of round out our conversation on conditions. I'm going to start with Lori had sent over, based on our conversation last time, where we stood based on some of the conversation that we had and some additional edits. So what I'm going to do is I'll bring that up so we can start to take a look at that, make sure it represents what we discussed when we last met. And then see if there's any other discussion for where we stand from last week. And then we just have a short little list left to finish up this evening. And I think that should do it. Before I get started on that, is there anything else that the applicant wanted to say or speak to or present?
The only suggestion we might have is to kind of start where it appears the meeting last broke off, which in Laurie's draft is condition Y, I think. And do that first just to kind of get the whole template as to where we stand across the board. And if time permits and people want to do it this evening, go back to the beginning then, or we can provide revisions or our comments ahead of the next meeting, whatever that fits the board's schedule.
Okay, that sounds like a good suggestion. Board members, does that sound okay to everyone?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna pull up now, let's see. I gotta make sure. So some of these had edits. So Lori, in the version you sent from the 28th, you have highlighted ones where the applicant had edits, but the ones that are highlighted do not actually reflect the edits. This, you're just noting that they had edits to this from a previous version, or these are the edits?
No, those aren't the edits. I was just noting that the ones that are not highlighted, chances are we could just skip over, but the highlighted items warrant further discussion.
Okay, great. That's helpful. So let's see, why don't I look at the sheet?
So the version that's called Applicants Comments 31623 is the one that we left off at. So that's my working document dated March 8th, 2023.
Okay. So for some reason, my letters don't match up. So why for me on what the applicant edited is about trucks?
So yes, there were some conditions that were eliminated. And so where we should start this evening on that draft is letter AA.
Oh, I see it. Yep. Okay. Got it. Okay. Hold on a second. Okay, so I'm going to share the version, Lori, that you sent. Okay, can everybody see? It's a version. It looks like it's highlighted here, property owner shall ensure.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the edit made here from the applicant is consistent with the provisions of, then it says with section 7090020. Any comments on this one? I think this is the one we started to talk about before, where we usually put for our conditions in perpetuity. So that's probably what was deleted. Yes. So what had been deleted before was the in perpetuity, including replacement. This was removed and the edit was made to consistent with section 7090020.
That bylaw section, Madam Chair, speaks specifically to replacement within one growing season with similar type and size of species as approved as part of the original site plan.
Okay, and so Lori, I thought this was the one, and I made a comment, and you didn't think it was the case. They were talking about the rules and regs. Or was it a different one?
So this is a zoning bylaw provision that Mark is referencing.
But for maintaining plants in perpetuity, is that a rule in our rules and regs?
Let me pull that up.
That's one thing Bob always says to us. If it's on the site plan, it has to be maintained in perpetuity. He always says anything, whether it's a fence, whether it's plantings, anything that's shown on the site plan is maintained in perpetuity. But we always add it as a condition, just so the applicants know.
Well, just to be clear, the maintenance of the landscaping to achieve the purposes of the plan is a requirement in perpetuity while the plan's in place. The replacement of species that die is further specific in the bylaw. So they aren't one and the same thing. You have to maintain the landscaping consistent with the site plan, but you don't necessarily have to replace within the growing season unless it happens within the first growing season. That's what the bylaw says.
Okay. And then Lori, do you have anything additional there?
No, it was just talking about the submittal requirements and the rules and regs, so I didn't see that. But Mark, for clarity's sake, are you saying that if the plants die within 2 growing seasons, then you agree that the applicant is on the hook to replace those plants? You're just saying that it doesn't have to be done within 1 growing season. Is that what you're saying?
That you have to maintain the landscaping. And if a piece dies, then you have to replace it in some fashion.
So I don't understand what the problem is with the language as proposed in letter Y. Because doesn't that say the same thing?
It would seem to be appropriate to not parse whether this is different than what the bylaw says, but just use the language out of the bylaw, which is pretty clear as to intent.
I recommend we just leave it.
Yeah, this is pretty standard to what we put on all of our conditions of approval. There's nothing different about it. Everyone gets in perpetuity. So I actually don't understand the difference of what you're saying either. It seems that we're all saying the same thing. We just don't like the language. The language sounds like we don't like, but we're all saying the same thing. If something dies, you replace it.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Okay, for this next one, the exterior lighting edits, it looks like what was deleted. A couple of things were deleted here. The right to review, the cutoff shield. So making sure the light isn't seen from neighboring properties. So those are the things deleted. So it looks like it's the same up until this line here, and then a couple of lines removed. So nothing about light source can't be seen from the neighboring properties, and the board removal of reserves the right to review the project lighting. So any thoughts on this one? I'd be curious from the applicant why we wouldn't want to make sure that you can't see the lights from the neighboring properties.
Well, you'll observe that there's light in the distance. The light doesn't shine past the property line, but it's observable that there is a light in the distance.
I think where it says light source, the full cutoff is so the bulbs don't show. So if there's a full cutoff, the light source should not be seen from the neighboring properties if it's really shielded. The light source is the bulb, and the shields cover the bulb.
The plan is fairly specific as to the type of fixture and the light source that's created from it. I'm not sure why a condition has to go beyond that. The lighting will comply with the site plan as reflected as to the nature of the fixture and the result of it.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't like the full cutoff shielded lights. Is there something that you're proposing that's different that would achieve that, or you just don't like that condition in general?
It's not crossed off on mine.
It's not crossed off on mine either.
Oh no, this version is pre-edits from, so the one with the highlight is the pre-edits from the applicant. Then there's the one from the applicant that has all the red lines. So it's is it not excluded on the red line one?
Right, I have the red line, it's not excluded.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, it's not. You're right. So it's just the part that's saying that can't be seen from the neighboring properties. So if it did have a full cutoff and shielded light, Amy, are you saying theoretically the light source would not be seen by way of having the shields there. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
And Attorney Donahue, it sounds like you disagree that it still could be seen despite having the shielded lights.
I
You're going to
agree
observe-
with,
You're
I
going to
agree with
observe.
Mr. Donahue.
Sorry,
That
go ahead.
It is going to be visible, but it's not gonna, it's gonna be visible from beyond the area that is going to be lit. But if you're, you know, gazing across the horizon, kind of like when you're looking, if you're looking from one end of the street to the other, you're gonna see that there is a light in the distance, maybe 1,000 feet away. But where you're standing is not going to be lit.
Okay, so board thoughts on that one. Does that make sense to the board?
I would only if the board reserves the right to review the project lighting and require adjustments if it finds it to be a danger or nuisance, then I'd take out that sentence. And you know, it's not like we're gonna come back, but if it's like, remember the other property where it had that bright light that was shining out? If there's something that needs to be fixed because it's shining improperly, then the board or the planning director should reserve the right to review the lighting and require adjustments. And it may not be in the photometric where it's on the ground, but it might be going at an angle because the shielding's wrong.
Mhm.
Lori, thoughts on that? If there's something, so it sounds like the board's desire is to just make sure, despite having the shielded lights, there's not some sort of understanding that you're going to actually see a light, that it's not causing some sort of issue, that if their shield isn't correct or whatever the case. Is that something, how would you normally be able to correct that?
I would agree to eliminate the wording that they suggested. But I mean, originally, I thought it would be okay to reserve the right. I mean, if you don't feel comfortable, Mark, with having the planning board do that, then, I mean, typically it would be the job of the building inspector, who is the enforcement authority on planning board decisions anyway.
Right, yeah, but I think that's the point is if there's a light shining off the property, then the plan and the lighting's not in compliance with the plan as shown. If the standard is a danger and nuisance, I'm not too worried about the board review either. So.
Well, I think the, Madam Chair, if I may, Scott Weiss with Gutierrez. I agree with where everybody's heading, and I think, you know, if that last section is, you know, if the board reserves the right to review the project lighting to ensure compliance with the plan and the bylaw, we've already, and I think the town requires the full cutoff shielded lights. It's going to be in the condition with that. We didn't take issue with that, so that's already in there, and we're fine with the board reserves the right to ensure compliance. We're okay with that.
Okay, board, how do you feel about that?
I'm good with that.
Me too.
Okay,
The only thing is, I think there's a difference between the photometrics plan and the shielding. But we can move forward and I'll think about it, but
But
I
the
know-
cutoff and shielded lights is going to remain in your, we did not, nobody was
Right.
seeking to strike that, so that's in there. You guys have a cutoff shielding requirement, I believe, in your bylaw as well. And we're all talking about doing the same thing. We're in agreement on that. It's just the introduction of different undefined terms, danger or nuisance. We'll be in full compliance with the plan, and we're okay with that.
okay. That sounds okay to the board and ensure compliance with the bylaws. Was that what you said? We can fix this. We don't need to get the exact words, but that was the sentiment. Lori, I don't know. I know you don't feel well, so I'm just going to put notes in here, and I'm sure you're watching and taking notes too, but will this be enough for you to kind of get a sense
Yeah.
of?
What I wrote in my notes is the board reserves the right to ensure compliance with the photometric plan.
But
So-
Amy was saying that wasn't exactly the same thing. Amy, are you saying that's not the same
Mm-mm.
thing?
Right. Sometimes with the photometrics plan, I mean, sometimes if the light source is shown because of the shielding isn't correct, then it's more like you see the bulb. You don't see, it might not shine across, it might still match the photometric plan, but you'll see the bulb going across the horizon versus on the ground. Isn't photometrics goes down onto the ground?
Well, LED lights are directed lights. So they're different than your traditional bulb that is not a full cutoff. So those tend to shine out. So your traditional street light shines out across the horizon, but LED lights are directed to the ground. So there shouldn't be that effect. So the photometric plan is showing that there is going to be no spillover of light. So they're showing exactly where the light is going to be directed. And it's showing that there will be no spillover of light beyond the limits of the photometric plan. So none of the abutters will be lit by these LED lights, although they may still view them from a distance.
If I
The
may.
LED lights still have the full cutoffs?
Yeah, that I just want to reiterate that you're both correct and you're both saying sort of different things, Lori and Amy. We do have LED fixtures proposed. They are all full cutoff shielded fixtures. They've been identified on the plan. So you should not see the light source, and we are comfortable again with ensuring compliance with both the plan and the bylaws, that, you know, if there is a fixture that is not properly shielded and you're viewing the light source in a way that you shouldn't, then that is probably an incorrect or a faulty or broken fixture. So because they are fully recessed light sources within a housing, that is how all the light fixtures are. So they would all be up inside
Right,
a device.
right. So you shouldn't see the light
So
source.
you should not see the light source, except for, you know, if you're down a hill, lying on the ground in,
Mhm.
you know, in the park, that's the kind of thing that we can't adjust for all the grades and everything through there, but you will not see the light source off the property based on the shielding and the heights.
Okay, so Amy, good to you?
I guess so, except for we're cutting off the part about not seeing the light source. And do those LED lights come in the amber color that they recommend for the habitat areas? Or are they the bright white?
They come in the good thing about LEDs, if you've been into your Home Depot or Lowe's lately, you can buy them in almost any color. And I think there was a color recommendation that we have, Israel, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And what's being proposed is, yeah, more of a yellow light as opposed to a blue light.
Okay, so it's like an amber, they say amber or light green, yellow.
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
That's
is that on the plan or do we have to note that in the condition?
It's on the plan. And I also believe it was part of a memo that was submitted that talked about the light fixture itself and, you know, the temperature of the lighting. There was a lot of detail that was provided in that memo. And so this is all consistent with that.
Okay, ready to move past that one?
And you do have that in your conditions. It says and includes a warm lighting color as opposed to cold, which is the bluish bright
Mhm.
white.
Okay, so moving on then, it seems like the next one has some similar changes, which we just discussed. So it looks like other than some of those changes, the proposed change is parking lot lights located on the pole shall be shut off or reduced to a minimum security levels consistent with the needs of the tenant, and then goes into the within 2 hours of closing each evening. So it then takes out the, it's not, do your security lights also have the shield just by default too, or no?
It's all the same lighting.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a whole similar as to
Right.
what we just discussed. So any board members have issue with the proposed edits for this next one?
Well, the problem is, I had asked before what the security levels are, and we don't know. So the security level could be the same thing as what the maximum level is. So that means no change. Attorney Donahue mentioned that the minimum security lighting would be determined by the tenant, and we don't know who the tenant is or what the requirement for minimum security lighting is. So I don't feel that that's just the lights are going to be on 24 hours. It's not really a difference.
Lori, when we talk about minimum security lighting, just in a standard way, what does that sound like?
Well, for safety and security reasons. So if you were to have an employee who works beyond their traditional work hours, then you need to have a minimal amount of light in the parking lot. So that, just for the safety of the employee who is working in the parking, in the building.
Mhm.
So I would not recommend any sort of condition that would require the parking lot to be completely black.
No, I know. I'm wondering, like, is there, like, how do you quantify one person's minimum versus another? So what is minimum? So clearly it says reduced to minimum security levels, but Amy's wondering, well, what does that mean? Is that the same as daytime, or is there any way to quantify that? Or is
I think-
minimum security lighting a standard term that makes sense?
I think it's standard. I imagine that the insurance company is going to have something to say about what is the minimum acceptable level. Of course, the folks who are going to be operating that business are going to want to ensure that they're not going to be liable if a crime is committed.
Mhm.
So I would just leave it as suggested by the applicant in this case,
Okay.
because we don't want to put them in a position of doing something that is going to cause somebody to be hurt.
Yeah.
For one Lyman, we had it where the minimum security lighting was the wall packs on the doors, and those shined out over the parking lot. So it wasn't the high parking lot lights.
But if that means that the parking spaces are going to be black.
What's amazing is I went to one Barefoot Road, which is headed towards 290, and they had no light poles in their parking lot, and they only had the wall building packs, and the parking lot was fully lit. I'm sure on the drawing it could show with the photometrics plan, if you just put the wall packs on at night, how much of the parking lot it would light up.
No, I don't think that those would reach the rear of the parking lot. It's a pretty long ways. I don't think you could reach that with the wall packs.
So in that, if we can't do that with wall packs, is this fine with the board on how it's written now? Or not how it's reflected up here on the screen, but the edits?
Well, it's just the same. Then the lights are going to be on 24/7. How about, do they have to be 27 feet high? What happens if those parking lot lights go down to 20 feet high? Which some of them are 20 feet high, but the majority of the ones on the side with the neighbors are 27 feet high.
Typically, if you shrink the height of the lights, you just need to put more poles in to provide that average 1 foot candle that you're looking for the minimum security. So it's still going to be a similar level of lighting. It's just you're going to have a few more poles at a shorter height.
I guess I'd like, if we're gonna come back at another meeting, I'd like to see what minimum security lighting is gonna be. Some sort of quantifying, if it's any different.
So Madam Chair, if I may, and this is the reason why that statement was in there, is because a tenant and their insurance company is going to end up having to specify what's acceptable, and it's going to depend upon, as we've talked about, their worker schedule, because they don't want to put anyone in an unsafe environment. And I think as an example, the lights at 1 Barefoot Road that you're talking about, the wall packs I think are mounted at the top of the building and are not fully shielded cutoff fixtures. They are pointed directionally over the parking lot. We are not proposing to do anything that would be pointed directionally. Everything is a fully shielded, down focused lamp.
Maybe you could have the minimum security lighting as part of, like, before the certificate of occupancy, once they know who the tenant is. Because say it's a tenant that is only there, like 301 Bartlett, that's only there from 8 to 5, then the lights could go off at 7 o'clock.
Well,
But if we have a condition in there that they're on 24 hours a day, then they'll be on 24 hours a day, even if the building closes.
No, wait,
Yeah.
it's still within 2 hours of closing.
So there's no desire to have, we're aligned in that nobody wants the lights to stay on all night if there's no reason for the lights to stay on all night. The user, the tenant, us, nobody wants that. You're just spending money unnecessarily on electric bills, right? So we're all in agreement there. It's just how you define, which is what you're concerned about, is how you define that minimum safe level. And in our experience, different companies, mostly because of either their standard protocols and or as set by their insurers, end up dictating what's considered acceptable minimum light levels. That's why it varies. In the past, when it wasn't LED lights, you would see companies shut off every other light pole because you couldn't control the light levels within a fixture. Now many of them can be controlled and dimmed, so they can go to half light level, something to that effect. But again, it could be less than that for many users. And I don't know what they do at 301 Bartlett, whether they turn off lights or not.
So this also still has within 2 hours of closing, so it's.
So you're obligated to do something to reduce the light levels.
Reduce it to a minimum security level. I mean, whatever that may be.
So then the line, just so everyone, I think it's confusing to look at the original and the proposed. So proposed would say parking lot lights located on the pole shall be shut off or reduced to minimum security levels consistent with the needs of the tenant within 2 hours of closing each evening. And then the wall packs stayed the same up until shielded.
Yep.
So that would be the revised. Board thoughts on that?
So where does it go to? I guess
So-
because we have such different, we all have different versions here.
So if you look at the one that has the applicant comments from 316, that that has parking lot lights located on the pole shall be shut off or reduced to minimum security levels consistent with the needs of the tenant within 2 hours of closing each evening. And then the rest of the sentence remains. If wall packs are added, will be shielded. So it's this part that changes.
I'm good with that.
So it includes if wall packs are added to the west side, residential side, they shall be
Correct.
mounted at door height and shielded.
Correct.
Mhm. That's where they are at 301 too, their door height.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. We good with this one?
I think so.
Okay. All right, let's see, Fred, I think I had this one flagged for you. Are you here with us, Fred, right?
I am.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Fred. So the edits to this were just, instead of December 22nd, I think it is last revised February 16th, 2023. And then instead of copies of the contract and invoices, it's copies of the documentation evidencing completion of all work and inspection performed. Is that okay with you?
Yep.
Okay, board members, any issues with these edits?
No, I'm good.
Okay. If it's not highlighted, it means there are no edits. So unless anybody wants to go through them, I'm going to skip them. Any comments on C, D, or E?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
at the risk of being burned at the stake, that's probably a bad image or reference by my own team. I need to ask why snow piles shall not exceed 4 feet in height.
It's because it's in your operation and maintenance plan.
So if I,
As that is the average height for the calculations, that it wasn't required that you would have to go higher to provide the snow storage that was calculated, correct, David?
yeah, so the issue with that I have is that I modeled them as 4 foot maximum because that's very conservative. That's actually a very short snow pile. So, you know, we showed you that we had all this snow storage on site, and I wanted to make sure that we weren't like showing that we had all the storage, and then you find out that the piles are 12 feet tall, and that's ridiculous. So 4 feet is actually very conservative. It's not to say that the snow can't be piled to 5, 6, 7 feet. I think a better terminology would be, you know, to a maximum height that's still safe. It's not toppling over. But that 4 feet was a reference to my calculations to show that we're being very conservative, that those are actually very short snow piles and we weren't assuming some ridiculous height. So I would, if we could, change that 4 feet to, you know, maximum safe height.
Or frankly, well, I mean, you can certainly keep maximum safe height. From my experience, that seems like an unnecessary restriction on snow plowing. As long as we get it in the right location, the calculations were based on 4 feet in height. The areas are not enormous, and so you're not going to get to, you know, shopping plaza mall type mounds of snow, but it just seems unnecessarily restrictive.
Laurie or Fred, I kind of defer to you on this one. Comments from you?
I typically, you know, as a standard condition through the years that I've been a planner, usually I recommend restricting the height of snow piles to no more than 8 feet tall. And if they're taller than that, ship them off site.
I would agree with that. I think that, and whether it's 8 feet or it's a safe height, whatever that is determined to be, I think what we're looking for from the town's point of view is that how high should we expect the piles to go before we start looking for you to take that snow off the site? I think 4 feet may be unreasonably low, but you know, 10 or 12 feet is too high. So at what point would we look to confirm that snow is going to be taken off the site without having to go out there every time it snows?
Do you guys have a suggestion of what would be reasonable based on?
Have we ever made that as a condition before? I don't recall that.
Well, this site is like, so, you know, they're maxed out to the very, on the edges of all the wetlands and the,
Mm-hmm.
I thought our expert or might have had a height. The Sandtech person. But I think, because this one, we had the problem with all the snow. And we don't want it to be pushed into the wetlands. I think other sites, if you don't have wetlands, then you just push it off.
Yeah,
The
so-
snow storage areas are all well defined not to go into any wetland. That is typically, that's an order of conditions requirement. That's a, that, you know, a typical protection. And that's all those areas are defined such that, sorry, go ahead, David.
And recall that we placed that guard rail, we extended it all the way along the rear of the truck court, because that was the location closest to the wetlands. And then we also are proposing for no snow storage signs in that area. So, you know, the most vulnerable area, there's no snow storage calculated or proposed there.
Okay.
And then lastly, I think we also had, and this is somewhere on the plan, I believe there was something like 4 times the amount of snow storage volume provided for the average 6-inch storm. So there's a significant amount of snow storage volume available.
And then you probably won't hit the 4 feet. So if we did write 8 feet, you should be all set.
Does 8 sound okay?
8 is livable. It's just as I mentioned, you know, my team thought it was unnecessary to even bring this up, but I just thought 4 feet was unnecessarily restrictive.
Okay. Board, we're good with 8 feet?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Fred and Lori, that makes sense to you in general? What would be a standard acceptable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that makes sense because I think most likely there'll be some of the snow storage areas that get utilized all the time, and some snow storage areas, as shown on the plan, won't get utilized at all. It'll just be a lot to do with who is ever doing the plowing and how they're maintaining it. And so restricting it to 8 feet to 4 feet, I think would be too restrictive.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, if I may, it may be appropriate to use both the numeric limit as well as the more descriptive standard of safety that's already been discussed. I think this would be one of those edit issues that I mentioned previously, where we would just combine the standards that I think everyone is now in agreement on. And I think that would cover completely the questions that might arise.
Okay, so you're suggesting like to comply with standards of safety or something like that?
Right, we would use the safety standard, but not to exceed 8 feet. And because in some instances, as I think folks have said, you may have a shorter or taller pile depending on the particular location and the topography, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll just put that note there, and then Lori, or we can work to wordsmith it. But basically, the heart of it is just want to comply with safety standards and keep under 8 feet. Okay, great. So then moving on for this next one, it looks like instead of the addition of generators, it's prior to the addition of generators. And then there was a bit of language added here about if required, what that looks like. So if it is required, then there's quite a bit of language added about submitting to the planning department an analysis from an acoustical consultant confirming that the equipment doesn't increase broadband sound level at the property line more than 10 decibels above ambient or produce a pure tone in excess permitted by Mass DEP. I don't know if do we need to put the policy date in there? I wonder as they update that, does that peg us to does that become outdated? I'm not sure. But otherwise, any comments from the board on that proposed revised language?
I mean, I would change that to, you know, current DEP or current standards.
Yeah, maybe just so it's not dated to 1990.
Yeah, so it's not dated.
What do our bylaws say, 10 or 5 in the performance standards?
I believe it's 5.
This one.
Thought it was 5.
Does anyone have that handy? 705040 are the performance standards.
Yeah, it's 5.
Yep. Okay. Yes, it is 5. So I think in that case, I personally was fine with this language, except for just making it line up with our performance standards, which would be 5, not 10. Any other board comments on the proposed revision?
I'm okay with it being 5.
And removal of maybe the actual date. So it would just be permitted by the Mass DEP Division of Air Quality Control policy. But we'll just say current policy. Okay, anything else on this one? Okay. This one, like we only have a couple left that were edited. So this was proposed to be changed to coupling or decoupling tractors between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So I think we got to push this one a little bit because I'm not sure coupling and decoupling solves the issue or the concern about issues. Thoughts from the board in general about this one here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be, it says, it said outside operations, but that was crossed out. Maybe something like no shipping or receiving.
Oh, okay, so this top part was crossed out. I see what happened. This top part was actually removed entirely, so that all that was left was that there shall be no trailer connects or disconnects between 10 and 6. So I personally, that doesn't hit what I personally would think we're trying to achieve here. So any thoughts from the applicant on your proposed edit here? I'd be curious to hear what you're thinking.
Sure, and I'm sure Mr. Weiss and Mr. Lopez can weigh in also. But the coupling and decoupling of tractor trailers is generally the thing that causes the most noise. The ability of an industrial user in the permitted hours of operation to bring a tractor trailer to a loading dock and then to use time after those hours of outside operation to load that tractor trailer from the inside or unload it is an important component of being able to use the site. And because it's mostly occurring within the building or within the box itself, and recall that the tractor loading dock or the loading docks are on the opposite side of the building from the residential property, we didn't want to get in an argument as to what that was as far as outside operation. You have other conditions that prohibit outdoor storage, so it's clearly not moving goods around the yard in some fashion. It clearly can be people coming and going from work in some fashion, and that shouldn't be considered part of operations. But it was really the active use of a trailer that would be dormant at a dock, even though it was after 10 p.m.
Okay, board thoughts on that?
Well, how about instead of outside activities, no shipping and receiving? If the truck is there, then it can be filled at night. It's not coming and going.
Well,
But
it can't come and go if it can't couple and decouple.
Yeah, but there could be vans that don't have to couple and decouple, or certain trucks, certain sizes. They can still load and unload and come and go all night without coupling and decoupling. And the neighbors and everybody else could see it on the driveway coming and going, even though the loading dock's on the other side, the driveway is accessible.
Would it make the applicant feel better to have shipping and receiving instead of just a more vague term like outside operations?
My understanding of shipping and receiving may be loading and unloading inside the trailer itself, which would be an indoor activity. Right? You're trying to restrict vehicles from coming and going at any time during the night. And we're just seeking to try to limit the noisy part of the operation. The trucks coupling and decoupling. There could still be some vehicles that enter or exit.
Then they have backup beepers. There's other noises with trucks coming and going all night. I mean, this is the warehouse that's closest to the neighbors. And it's way bigger than in scale than any other building near the neighbors. So, I mean, already our bylaws say it has to be within scale. It's not. And having trucks coming and going all night with all the sounds, not just coupling and decoupling, like I said, the backup beepers, the lights coming and going up the driveway.
So
I
for
don't know.
301, if you look at 301, they close, what time do they close? They don't have an all-night operation. So I guess without knowing who the tenant is, I mean, do you have any sense of the tenant? Is it possibly a tenant like that where it just doesn't matter? You actually don't need all that extra. Like, I hate to expand it to something you don't even need, and then where we feel at risk or you feel prohibited. So like, is there a realistic middle ground?
And
Yeah,
the thing
so-
is, this decision goes for life. It runs with the property for life. So if we don't know what it is, it's better to err on the side of caution. And then if there's a use that's not noisy that wants to go on at night, then they could come in and amend the decision.
Yeah, the challenge that you guys are worried about is exactly the challenge that we're concerned with on our end is, you know, we would build this without knowing the tenant. The tenant, just like 301, could be closed and not there, and that could be the type of activity that's there. At the same time, there could be some vehicles that do come and go later at night. And then the restriction, you know, restricts the ability for anybody to come in and utilize the building. That's what we're concerned about. Then we have a vacant building that nobody can use.
So for me, I don't, board members feel free to weigh in differently. The inside, whatever happens inside is not up to us anyway. So if there are people that have to work inside the building, they obviously have to be able to get into the building. The real part of it is just really like those big trucks, like that happens across the street at Amazon, that just come and go all night. It's noisy, there's bright lights. And in fact, now we wouldn't even have our lights reduced at that point, because I imagine we need to have some sort of adequate lighting for them to come in and out. So it just creates a more intense use than I think we feel comfortable really just kind of closing our eyes and seeing what transpires.
Yeah. So we're trying to limit the truck movements, tractor trailer truck movements between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., which is what we were looking to limit it to.
Yeah, it's a little late for, let's say that for argument's sake, pretend it's 10 to 6, whatever the case. Go ahead with your continued point.
Yeah. Yeah, that is that's going to be a restriction on the use of the facility. And we understand that it's a, you know, something desired by the board and, you know, and the neighbors. So if we can word it, Mark, is there wording that you think we can do that limits? Obviously, coupling and decoupling we're already at, but we're talking about delivery activity. The tractor trailer truck delivery activity.
Having a complete prohibition can be difficult for both and a tenant trying to anticipate what their needs are. And it can also be hard sometimes for a tenant to control it, because some shipments, frankly, you'd rather get them on site, even if you're not coupling and decoupling, as opposed to having them circling, waiting for the time to come. So perhaps what we could think about is some limit on movements between those hours that would give at least enough leeway so that Gutierrez could go to market and say it's not encouraged. And therefore, if what you're seeking is a 24-hour operation, this is probably not the right place. But it's also not a potential zoning violation if during a peak season, you're still moving trucks out to a limited amount, during those hours. And given the volume of traffic in the area that's been talked about extensively during the course of the hearings, the volume, I think, would be a de minimis amount compared to what is otherwise going on, if that would be amenable.
Attorney Janeski, thoughts from you on what that could look like?
Madam Chair, there are a number of variables here. I think there's a question of a technical description of what would be involved or could be involved with respect to loading and unloading, coupling and decoupling, and to put it all into the umbrella term of processing vehicles and/or product. And it seems to me that perhaps with the acknowledgements that have been put on the record, it might be helpful for both the applicant and planning, and I can certainly consult with Laurie on this, to work on what, again, I would probably refer to as performance type language that creates some limits, but does allow some flexibility so that it is not attempting to achieve a one size fits all, which it does seem to me is probably not possible for this condition.
Board members' thoughts?
In Holliston, they had a condition of movement of trucks. We'll have an hour of operations restriction between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. in an effort to eliminate backup alarms, trailers, uncoupling, and idling near the properties, residential properties. And they also added the 30-foot planted berm and fence enforced. But yeah, they said movement of trucks as an hour of operations restriction.
So if we had movement of trucks, but with some sort of performance language that Attorney Janeski talked about, does the board agree with something like that?
Are we limited to tractor trailers though, or any other activity flies with the proposed language?
Well, movement of trucks, if you, I guess I'm extrapolating then, if the trucks are unable to move around, there's limited ability to do much. I mean, obviously passenger cars could still come in for employees. What are you thinking, Anthony?
No, I'm just saying that the proposed language is limited to tractor trailers. So what about, delivery vehicles, box trucks, different type of, commercial vehicles coming in and out? That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, from Amy's language? Okay, so movement of trucks, Amy, was pretty much the language there.
Yeah, they were trying to limit backup alarms. So I guess it would be, you could say movement of trucks and delivery vans.
What about delivery commercial vehicles?
Well, yeah, no, that could be consistent. We've used delivery vans and commercial vehicles in the other conditions. So maybe it's something like delivery vans and commercial trucks.
I think vans creates a whole nother, and commercial delivery vehicles creates a whole nother level. I might echo what Attorney Janeski suggested. Perhaps putting some language out with the concepts that have been discussed would make some sense, and we'll see if we can get closer when we've got some actual language to look at.
Attorney Janeski, can certain conditions run with Is it all or nothing when weather conditions run with the land? Like, one thing that does concern me was Amy brought up is, so say we come to this agreement, but we don't end up really even needing this for the next tenant, but this condition runs with the land forever. Is there anything there where it this particular one didn't run with the land?
Madam Chair, the conditions in the document and the document as a whole would apply. I'm not
Okay.
aware of limiting a condition in the way that it would not follow the others.
Okay.
There's always the opportunity with a special permit for a modification of conditions based on future circumstances that either aren't known or can't be known sufficiently to account for them at the time of action by the permit granting authority. So I'm not sure there's a way to hybridize this, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's okay. I didn't think so.
I would ask that no matter what that language is, and to reflect both of our interests, that we include perhaps as part of this condition, something that provides the opportunity to return to the board for, an allowance out of operations outside of these restrictions, that there's some ability in the condition that a tenant says, look, we've got, whatever, one activity that happens at 10:30 p.m. and we want to have, the board okay that, so that we write in language in there that allows for the board to provide some relief in the future following a request by a tenant or user.
So Attorney Tedeschi, does an applicant always have that option regardless if we write that in here or not necessarily?
The law does permit a special permit holder to seek a modification. It's again the same as the original application, although here we're, I think, primarily dealing with site plan conditions. So we would probably want to be more specific, but I also think that the same kind of principle would apply, because we've been talking about issues where from both the planning board side and the applicant side, there may be reason to modify a decision that's issued as a result of this process. So I think we could certainly include some basic language about the ability to seek a modification based on changed circumstances. And I'm just using some generic language as an example.
I mean, if we were to be in a situation where we're looking at, trying to be flexible enough to make sure the applicant can, fill the warehouse, I definitely would then want to make sure, we talked about the barrier that we discussed last time. Like, we talked about it being impervious. I would definitely want to make sure it had like sound abatement qualities. I'm not expecting like a cement wall, but it seems like we'd want to definitely tighten up the description, how we describe that whatever selected has, I don't know if it's sound abatement properties or whatever that looks like, but just to make sure if there is movement beyond what we expect, that's the second line of defense, is some sort of sound light prevention.
And I would appreciate that, Madam Chair. However, again, just going back to the layout of the site, the building itself is our sound barrier to the neighbors, because that activity is behind the building on the opposite side of the building, and that's how it was laid out to not be directly abutting the neighbors. So you have that building serving as your sound barrier.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm just saying, like, obviously we wouldn't want, like, a chain link fence isn't going to do anything, or so even with like slats would not necessarily do anything. So I just want to make sure. I think we talked about like impervious or things like that.
Yep.
That just would make
I think we had said solid, but yeah, I understand. We understand that. Yep.
Okay, board members' thoughts on this in general? Any comments or thoughts here?
Yeah, and one thing it was up at the top, so we haven't talked about it yet. But I do think the design of the fence should be added to the site plan, just like how you get the design of the drainage. So there's no surprises.
That might be under the section that. Is that under modify the site plan to show?
Yeah, I was gonna talk about when we went back to the top. But since we're talking about the fence.
Okay, any comments on this section here in general? Okay, so we're focused on coming up with language that's about movement. Are we board members 10 to 6 comments or thoughts on that?
Time frame's okay, but you'd be open to hearing additional.
I would prefer the 9 to 7, but I certainly understand that that does have some limitations to desirability and marketability.
I think the nature of this type of operation is, I don't think would allow 7 AM for start time.
Unless it's like 301 Bartlett, they're 8 to 5. So you'd start with 9 to 7. And if they have to come in and change it, like we talked about with the other, oh, maybe that's the same one. They can come in and change it depending on who the tenant is.
That becomes circular, because the ability to find a tenant under those restrictions becomes almost unmarketable. And so, and the truth of the matter is, in the business the Gutierrez company is involved in, tenants just don't wait to come back to boards to see if they can have a condition that they can't operate under. They just go on to the next property. So it has to be commercially reasonable for an industrial area. There's a pretty strong argument that an industrial area should be used 24 hours. We're talking about some good faith efforts to try to give you some protections with some language. But it has to be recognized that the nature of an industrial use it varies. And while it would certainly be wonderful for the neighborhood to find somebody who works 8 to 5, 5 days a week, and maybe that will happen, Gutierrez has to be able to go to market using it as a full-blown industrial facility.
So you mentioned last week, Scott, I think it was you, that you're working with a broker to find a tenant, and they give you, it sounded like they give you like parameters of what would be like a good market position for you. Did they give you any sense of like what hours, so commercially reasonable hours from their perspective that would?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. You're not going to like the answer. They said anything we do to restrict the hours is going to limit the ability to fill the building and have it used.
Okay.
So they were very, very clear and specific on that. And there are tons of users out there who don't need and won't be using, have activity off hours or anything, not seeking a 24-hour operation. Most of them are not Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out there. So we understand that. It's just that even the users that don't may not want to look at a building with restrictions, because they might, on some random weird chance, have a truck that arrives earlier in the morning than 6 AM, or something happens, or whatever. It could be once a year, once every 5 or 10 years, but they worry about these things and say, oh, well, we can't go there just in case. And that's the reality of it. So we're trying to find a way that we can market the building, get someone in that and have a reasonable restriction that everybody can live with. And if there is a need or request to go outside of those accepted conditions, there's a process to come and request it.
So, thank you. Lori, in your experience, is there a commercially reasonable time frame?
So in my prior communities that I worked in, there were not restrictions placed on hours of activity. So this is a new experience for me.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like, in general, the board is okay with some sort of language. It sounds like any thoughts on adding some sort of mechanism to come back, or is that inherent in the, Attorney Dineski, it sounds like that's inherent in this permit that you could come back for any one of these really at some level?
Yes, I think that's fair, but I also think it makes sense since we are being very comprehensive here in the interest of completeness to include a specific sentence to that effect.
Okay, board members, thoughts overall then on that? Okay, so we're settling on movement of trucks. We're settling on hours which are gravitating to 10 to 6, and a line about some sort of mechanism to come back and if there's a special request or a time period or something like that. Okay, let me ask a question. Say we don't want to modify the whole decision because the tenant really only needs like to do deliveries at 10:30 for the holiday season. They don't actually need that like all year round. Is there a way to do a short-term accommodation without modifying the decision or no? Attorney Dineski, do you know?
I think you could include some general language that would allow for a limited period of the year when activities outside the set hours are permitted within certain parameters. The other alternative would be that if the ultimate user turns out to be one that does have peak times and would be looking to operate outside the set hours, that could be the subject of a modification application.
Okay. All right, any additional comments or thoughts on this one? Okay, we don't have any edits to the next few. Looks like the final one has some edits. So let's see. So the new one would be any proposed material change or substantial modification, except in all instances, a reduction in the size of the building and a corresponding reduction in the total impervious area of the property. So it sounds like you're just adding something to say, if you're making it smaller, there's no need to come back. Is that what the point is of that line?
Correct, that portion.
Okay. So far, board members, does that make sense? Really not, we're not looking for them to come back if it's smaller. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so if there's otherwise substantial modification to the size or configuration of the property, they would have to come back pursuant to the zoning bylaws. But so this is what, as an effect of December 2019, is that true, Attorney Dineski? That if they needed to amend it, it's subject to the old zoning bylaws, even though it's a modification?
Chair, the zoning that applies to this application is the prior zoning. I do want to think a little bit about precisely how that provision would be worded, because it's conceivable that there's some element of a modification that may not fall within the prior zoning. I can't give you a specific example now, but I'm reluctant to say it's absolutely the case that anything in the future would be subject to the 2019 zoning. Although I will say that it's likely that most things would be
Okay.
within the elements that we are discussing now.
Okay, so even forevermore, if you come back for a except I know, realizing you said you need to think about it more. In general, this application falls under old zoning bylaws, whether there's a modification or amendment or anything, it still falls under those bylaws forevermore.
No, I think they have to go for non-conforming use. Like if they wanted to do an addition, not that they could fit an addition, but if you wanted to do an addition and the zoning bylaws had changed, it's usually a non-conforming use. So I do think I would take out that last sentence, because now you're saying you don't have to fall under the non-conforming use bylaw because you're allowed to follow any bylaws that were infected in 2019. Where it's a different set of standards, I think, to do the non-conforming use.
And just to confirm, I wouldn't want my remarks to mean that the principles of non-conforming use are gone. I made my comments because the language is obviously fairly broad, and there are lots of possible permutations of a modification. I am taking the language to be more particular to a approval of this certain use, rather than something that is more extensive in scope, such as a non-conforming use question. But I think this is one of those elements where some editing would definitely be appropriate to reflect the principle that we can't necessarily determine at this point in time all of the bylaw provisions that might be applicable at a point in the future. And therefore, the general principle would be that the law with respect to approvals prior to a zoning change, and again, I'm simplifying, would be the applicable law here.
I think the whole section should come out, because if there are material changes, they have to come back anyways for an amendment or non-conforming. I'm not sure why we even need that last condition.
I think this is something we've been putting on to make sure that things don't change.
I think, well, it said to the use, intensity, and size, but that was all crossed out.
Oh, right. Okay, so this is something we've been putting on the last few applications, just to make sure that the plan that's been presented is the one that is actually put into place, and there's not some sort of change along the way or anything else that happens. So this was actually originally by us put in. I think we started using this specifically around One Lyman. We developed this. In fact, Attorney Daneski, I think you helped us with this language the first time around.
I think the main points of it were taken out, so then
Yeah.
it lost.
Yeah, it lost its main point.
Yeah.
So I actually don't like tinkering with this one. I mean, it doesn't matter to me to add except reduction in size, but I don't like taking out the purpose of this, which is really to make sure this should not be changing.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that.
That's not acceptable to the applicant. You have to recall that the rules of the road is that this is been filed as an application for a building as a warehouse, as that term is defined or was defined by your bylaw in effect when it was done. And there are other uses permitted as of right in the industrial zone that would not require site plan approval if there wasn't going to be a change to the property. I don't even know what the term intensity means, but it's far too vague for use as of right for a process that governs the means and methods by which you build a building and develop a site.
Okay, do you have an alternate suggestion of maybe what we're trying to get across, which is really, we just want to make sure that what's been presented with the associated intensity, meaning like, how, is this, well, originally it was just pitched as a warehouse, like we talked about last week. I'm sure you saw, it was very clearly, this is going to be a warehouse. That's all it is, traffic wise, everything else wise. Is there any other language that
Well,
Good.
you know,
Get to that.
sure, I didn't mean to interrupt. I
Okay,
apologize.
go ahead.
You know, I recall that right now what we're reviewing is conditions of approval. You're going to craft a decision that's going to have certain findings that's going to make it clear your approval relates to a warehouse. And it might be prudent because of the nature of the bylaw changing to recite what that definition is applicable for this particular use. It's language directly out of your bylaw in some fashion. That's what it is. If by intensity you're referring to traffic, I think you've got a specific condition that you reviewed last week with regard to doing traffic monitoring and requiring any type of change for a warehouse if the warehouse is not the same. But it's analogous, I think, to the discussion we just had. If the first user of this building is a warehouse that uses it 8 to 5, and when they move out, somebody comes in and uses it 16 hours a day, there's going to be an increase in intensity. There's going to be more traffic going in and out because you're going to have more shifts, more deliveries, everything else, assumably. That can't be a grounds for review for a permitted use.
Okay, so what is your fear of keeping this as is? That you, for something minor, you'd have to come in, or it's just not clear enough in what instance you'd have to come in?
I have a lot of fears, but that goes well beyond the scope of this hearing. But I think it relates to what I just said. Is intensity suggests that the way the property gets used, how much traffic it generates, how much noise it generates, the nature of the products moving in and out, and that type of thing is going to be subject to review every time the tenant changes. And that's simply not what the law is. It's a warehouse. And whether it's a warehouse for seasonal goods, so it doesn't do a whole lot except twice a year when that inventory moves, or it's a warehouse for food products where there's deliveries and movement hourly in some fashion, it's all a warehouse. And that's all of what the data you received from VHB and the analysis that you had done that became part of the testimony in the land court case. None of that is subject to review again if it's used as a warehouse. And that determination as to whether a proposed user meets the definition of a warehouse is solely the decision of the building inspector.
Okay, so Attorney Dineski, I think you helped us craft this in the first place when we were looking at some other warehouses. Do you have a suggestion of how we could make sure we cover what we're trying to cover here, but also get to a little bit what Attorney Donahue is getting across?
Madam Chair, I can language revised to try to reflect the two concerns, both the board and applicant, that have been expressed.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little. I don't know if it broke up for everyone else. That broke up for me. Would you just mind repeating that?
Yes, I'll work on revising this to take into account the board and the applicant as you have just recognized.
Okay, so it sounds like you were saying you'd take a shot at revising this a bit to meet both sides, the goals. Board members, does that sound like something amenable to try to take another shot at this one?
I think so.
I wonder if it notes ITE code 150, because that's what VHB said. This is a warehouse, ITE code 150. And if that's part of, I don't know if that's part of the approval decision, then it's the use intensity as what was presented, because that's what the traffic study used.
Okay, so Attorney Dineski, if you take comments like that into consideration, maybe we can come to, I hate to get to the last condition here and have an impasse. So if we can get past this last one.
Yes, I'll take into account all the comments that I think go toward this perhaps more umbrella issue that have been made during the course of the hearings.
Okay, any other comments from board members? Okay, any other comments from the applicant? Okay, I am going to open up for public comment. And then we'll take it. I guess we have a comprehensive list. So let me ask everybody, would you like to, oh, Millie, go ahead. Do you have something there?
Oh, no, sorry, my bad.
All right, Amy, you do though.
Yeah, I had a change to one of the ones at the top, like Attorney Donahue said, we can go back to the top after.
Okay, yep. So before we go back up to the top, I was just gonna take public comments and then.
Oh,
we'll-
sure.
Yep, okay. Okay, so at this point, are there any public comments this evening? Okay, we have Janine, I'm gonna bring you in. Oops, hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Okay. Janine, you should be able to speak
Hi.
with your name and address.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I just have concerns about the hours of operation. And I know that the Gutierrez company keeps saying that the building is blocking the sound, but it doesn't. I can hear trucks going to Amazon, and that's much further away from the facility now. And I also feel like the way that things are being worded from the Gutierrez company is, there's all these good faith efforts, and there just seems like there's a lot of loopholes that can be twisted, and things don't work out in the favor of the residents. I mean, this is what we're fighting for, is to have our homes to be protected. And I just feel like that's just not happening with how Gutierrez is stating what they want. I think it was even commented that, specifics would be encouraged, but it wouldn't be a violation. I don't understand that comment, and I'm not part of the planning board. I'm not a lawyer, but it's just a little bit scary as a resident when you hear things like that. And then I will raise my hand again when it comes to the sound wall and the berm and the impervious walls, and because that's really important to this neighborhood. But thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks, Janine. And then I just want to note too, I think since we last met, we had a couple of submissions, and Janine, I know you submitted one of my, sorry, I was sending you back into the audience, but we received additional materials from Janine that included some information. I'll just quickly go through some guidance, best practices for warehouse facilities, specifically next to residential, noise impact analysis and mitigation, a link to some different sound barriers for residential developments. So those are all sent to the board, and I assume made its way to the applicant as well. Laura, you forwarded everything to the applicant at this point?
I know we've received a number of forwards from Ms. Connors. So.
Okay, all right, great. We also received, let's see, Rachel Armstrong sent an email in just about computer renderings to be able to see what it would look like, and some different samples that other sites had shown so that people could see what that would look like or lights would look like. Talking about CVOCs, sound wall, just making sure that the fence had, let's see, making sure it actually blocks sound, that if it's just a regular fence that doesn't block sound, that's not as impactful. I think that was from Rachel Armstrong. And then Manny Lopes, a couple emails, one that came late the last time we met, and I don't think the whole board was able to see it in time. But Manny had sent over some information about trees and shrubs and what was determined as adequate noise barriers from the Federal Highway Administration, that vegetation is not noise abatement, some information on traffic noise and analysis. And then Manny sent over today, this I don't know, did you receive an email today? It didn't come into us until 6:27, so the applicant may not have received it.
We got it.
Oh, you did? Okay. So information on health effects of diesel emissions, some guidance on Massachusetts noise regulations, just an overlay of the residential area and school with the warehouse. HUD noise guidance, and just echoing some of the comments from Janine's email. So we have that as well. And I see another hand up. I'm going to allow to talk. I think actually I recognize this might be Manny, but is this you, Manny? Oops. I just need your name and address. Can you hear us okay? Oh, you're on mute again. So I think it's *6 if you're on the phone to unmute. Oops, you look unmuted now.
Yeah, hi. I was probably at sometime or other because I was doing it while we were talking. It must not like the two-way or something. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's
this is Manny that you would just reference in the email, Carrie. And so I live on Bartlett Street, and I'm glad you got them because I was having mail delivery issues, even though it was sent earlier. But Michelle helped to try to get it to you folks, so that's why there was a lateness in you getting my email. So I'd like to work a little backwards on this because this whole issue of hours of operation, I understand why a business like a Gutierrez who wants to sell a building doesn't want any restrictions because obviously it's better for them from a selling standpoint, and as they've stated as such. But this particular facility is not like an Amazon or FedEx. It's been noted, very much like the Holliston reference. This facility actually abuts right up to, in close proximity to, a residential area. And so under DEP noise control regulation 310 CMR 7.10, they actually reference for residential areas that there's noise restrictions between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. So if I, for example, am out using my lawnmower at 10 o'clock at night, a neighbor or someone could call the cops on me because I'm violating that DEP noise regulation. If they're good neighbors and they're abutting to a residential area, I think that same DEP noise regulation should apply to this particular location. It's a warehouse, but a warehouse, where does it say a warehouse has to be a 24/7 operation? As you pointed out, 300's not. I know why they want it, but I don't understand that that we're not saying it can't be a warehouse. All we're doing is applying restrictions to hours of operation on it because it abuts the residential neighborhood, and therefore they have to meet similar requirements for noise regulations that have to be adhered to within that residential area. And that to me is 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that's why I sent the actual Massachusetts law, because I think we could state that and be in compliance with that regulation. So, anyways, that's on the noise issue and the operating hours. I really don't think we should give on that. I understand why they don't want it, but I don't feel it's their call. They're building a warehouse in Northborough that has residents here that have to be accommodated as well. And I don't think that means giving them the maximum opportunity to sell this thing by giving them no restriction on hours of operation. I think on the walls and the barrier, I think Janine and them have other comments on it too, but I would like to make a quick comment back to, I think it was condition Y on the light poles. The elevation location where this parking lot is, and as you saw in the overlay that I sent, there's a number of lights in there, and they're 27 and a half feet high above the parking lot. And so if you look at the elevation where this facility is going to be located, it's at a higher elevation than most of the residential buildings. So to say you can't see the light source, that to me is simple geometry, and that's dependent upon the point of the viewing angle of the resident. So if a resident's at a lower elevation point, they're going to be looking up, which to me, just because it's shielded, if you're at the same level of it, I don't see that you're necessarily being assured that a resident further away won't see the light source given their viewing angle. And to me, it should be pretty simple to go take a look at what the elevation points are for the neighborhood homes that abut the parcel of land and look at the elevation of where these lights are going to be located with 27 and a half feet added. And it should be pretty simple to calculate, can they or can't they see the light source?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, a sound barrier, one of the requirements on sound abatement from a design standpoint, I don't think we should be specifying the material. It could be whatever they want it to be. What we want to specify is the level of noise reduction. And the noise level reduction we want to get, so a truck is no louder than that of a car. If you read the first email I sent you, that dictates you really need to have a noise abatement barrier that's designed to achieve a 10 dB noise level reduction. I personally don't care what they make it out of, as long as whatever they do is a berm or 3 feet thick wood or a 6 inches masonry or whatever they want to build. The question is, can they deliver a wall that will provide a 10 dB noise reduction so a truck is no louder than a car? Now, I don't think that's unreasonable to dictate noise reduction, not the construction of what they want to put there. Just make sure they meet a noise restriction. So that's all I've got based on the 3 things. So I appreciate giving me the time to inject my viewpoints. Thank you.
Okay, great. And you're on your phone, so you may not, I did share your overlay while you were speaking. So thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah,
Oh, shoot, Manny, sorry. Sorry, Manny, I lost you there. Oops, I lost you for a second. I cut you off. You said one more thing.
That's okay. Yeah, no, I'm glad you got it, because I think it's not just the neighborhood that's down off the Stirrup Brook that's adjacent to it, but you know, if you look at the driveway entrance area and you go look at where Stone lives and stuff right there at the corner of Lyman, there's 2 residential properties that's almost straight line of sight towards the driveway. So they're going to be impacted, and so it isn't just, you know, the north side of Bartlett where they got trees and other things, but you know, there are neighbors that are actually going to be in Bartlett Street. It's going to, as you look up the street from their houses, they're going to have a straight shot at these lights.
Right. Okay, great.
And the school, by the way, and the other thing I was going to say, Carrie, is the school. I don't know what the noise levels will be all the way out to the classrooms, but my kids long graduated from Algonquin. But you know, I would think if you're in class and you're hearing lots of noise and backups and backup alarms and things like that, that would be rather disruptive in an educational environment.
Yeah, and I see that in your overlay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gary.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Okay, any other comments at this time? Okay, so why don't we go back to, we have from the top some changes that we made since based on our conversation last week. And I'm going to use, Lori, if you're still with us there, the looks like from the 28th was the last one there. So I think that's what.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, that's the most recent version.
Okay, great. So let's see. So everyone should see conditions discussed at 221, 37, and 321.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, this says March 24th working document, but the file name is the 28th. So I guess that's what we go with.
That's correct.
Okay, great. All right. And if it doesn't have red, just to clarify the depiction here, if it has red, it's what we've since edited, but if there's no red or any markup, then it is exactly as it was before. Is that true?
Yeah, so what I did is I marked the red text as kind of where I took liberties, because at the last meeting, there wasn't necessarily agreement on what the language should be.
Okay.
So Fred and I and Dave Tedeschi came together on this specific language.
Okay, and the applicant had a copy of this as well, so I assume you're not seeing this language for the first time, is that true? Or are you seeing this language for the first time?
We've had this language.
Okay, great. Okay, so from board members, any comments on this language drafted?
I had a change under E with the earthen berm. I mean, the ramp for the path.
Wait, are we looking at something different or here?
No, I had made changes, so I sent them to Lori, but I was going to share them tonight.
Oh, okay. So are you ahead of this or after, or within this or after it?
It was after that. So the depict the creation. I don't know if you want me to share my changes.
Okay, but is it Is it, oh, it's within this one here? You have
Yeah,
it-
it's within that one.
Oh, got it, got it, got it. Okay, sure.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get the right one. Can you see mine?
Yes.
Okay. My changes were just, some of it was just wordsmithing. It says within the limits of the aqueduct right away, but it really, the earth and berm, I think the ramp, isn't that in the adjusted grading area? Because the right of way is actually the passage where you drive across. It was just a little bit of wordsmithing.
No, the right of way
Mm-hmm.
is the entire parcel that contains the aqueduct. So if you look at the assessor's parcel map,
Mm.
it identifies by that map 51 parcel 1.
Yep.
So I'm not referencing, just the driveway crossing. I'm referencing the entire aqueduct parcel.
Okay, that's what I was trying to do.
It's the right of way associated with the aqueduct.
When I look at the GIS map, it shows the right of way of just like the crossings that go across the aqueduct are the different right of ways.
If you want to just eliminate right of way and just put the parcel reference.
Yeah, can you see it? It still has the map 51 parcel 1. And it says see adjusted grading area on the sketch.
So, yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, on the sketch that they sent out, Dave Robinson has a line adjusted grading area for the earthen ramp where they were going to put it. It's actually on the sketch.
If I might, Madam Chair, the general concept of trying to improve the access within the aqueduct area is generally acceptable to the applicant. And since we're going back for redrafting, we've got some nit language that's probably not the best use of anybody's time.
Sure. Yeah, I can share. I shared it with Lori.
Great. But what is troubling in this particular section is the requirements for, if the MWRA approval is not obtained, an obligation to donate land and construct an alternative path. And we're prepared, if MWRA approval is not obtained, of entering into good faith discussions with the planner and other appropriate officials about an agreement to achieve that. But that agreement needs to deal with issues as to location, methods of construction, responsibility of construction, responsibility and maintenance, legal responsibilities in case of injury, those type of things, all of which has to be kind of agreed to. So our only issue really with the language is the mandatory that we're going to have to donate this land, and we're going to have to build it, and we're going to therefore have to take on the responsibility for good. We're open to the idea of, if we don't get approval, we'll work in good faith to try to find an alternative location.
So I think, well, my understanding then is, if you were to scroll up a little bit, that Lori, you drafted this language based on what we talked about doing last week. So it's, I don't think we just made this up, but outside of, so if you take away the edits here, Lori, is this a reflection of what we actually discussed going forward with last week, or is this new?
Yeah, so this is what we discussed last week, but we didn't come up with the specific wording last week. So I don't think that, so I'm looking at the sketch plan, and I don't think we should limit where they're going to do the grading to this sketch plan. I think that it needs to be open to negotiation, because of course, this is the MWRA property. This isn't property that the town owns, nor the applicant. So I don't think we can dictate in the condition where the grading is going to take place. I imagine that the engineer would propose a plan, and then the NWRA may like it, or they may want an alternative location. So I don't recommend being specific as to the location. You know, I also don't feel totally comfortable with leaving it open to a good faith effort. Because I know, you know, certainly I think the applicant has been working hard to appease the planning board. However, in my experience, if it doesn't appear in the decision, then there's no teeth to it, and it often doesn't happen. So I would prefer for the language, if you don't like the specific language as it's been worded and you want to propose alternative language, then absolutely propose it. But I do strongly recommend having some language as to an alternative. But as far as any work within the MWRA property, not being specific
So
as
does
to
it
location or type.
So is this just a wordsmithing issue, or Attorney Donahue, you still?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think the first part, as far as what happens within the aqueduct area, is wordsmithing. I mean, we're not trying to design it. Obviously, we're going to try to get it. The second sentence is kind of the seminal, and it's more than wordsmithing. You know, what's drafted here is an obligation for the applicant, if you don't get MWRA approval, to design, build, and I guess perpetually maintain a trail on its property for public use. We're not prepared to agree to that. We're prepared to work out all the details that go with that and figure it out in good faith in some fashion, but not as a condition of an approval of an as of right use for site plan approval to be required to donate land to public use.
I think the point here was to make sure that as part of the criteria for improving pedestrian, bicycle, or vehicular safety on the site and egressing from it. So this really cuts that ability for that passability for pedestrians that we were trying to figure out a way. So it seems like if you don't have something, you're not going to be able to get through. So we wanted to figure out some sort of solution where ultimately there is still some sort of pedestrian way to get through. I don't think we have to prescribe it down to the very minute detail, but something should be there.
And the way I read it, it was donated to the town for the town to maintain. I don't think the applicant is going to have to maintain it in perpetuity.
Mark, this was aimed at dealing with a comment that came up at the last meeting about concerns about liability. So originally the condition said that the applicant will build a bypass trail on the frontage parcel. And then, if I remember correctly, they expressed concerns about the liability if somebody were to get hurt on that section of the bypass trail. So the thought about donating the easement was aimed at eliminating the liability issue, because of course it wouldn't be owned by the applicant, it would be owned by the town. So the liability would be the town's, not the applicant's.
So Madam Chair, if I may.
Sure.
I think, again, there's, and Attorney Donahue has referenced this already. There's a couple of pieces to this. One is the timing piece, and the other is the requirement. So we're fully prepared and committed to update the plan, depict on the plan the area is shown, we're fine with that, and we all recognize then that is subject to MWRA approval. And we're good with that, and we can do that prior to starting any construction activity. Our recommendation is actually to pull this bullet, which I think we all thought would go well under this area, but to pull this bullet out of prior to construction activity, because there are components of which, if we're talking about constructing, we can't complete the construction prior to construction activity. Obviously, we can depict the area of the trail on the aqueduct on the plans. That becomes part of the approved plans, with this condition that if the MWRA then does not approve, we go into this Plan B type situation, which is what we're all talking about. And in that situation, that, as Attorney Donahue is indicating, that is subject, we completely agree, it would have to be via an easement. And we are willing to work cooperatively, but we also can't be have the entire building held hostage, essentially, to the town deciding we're not going to sign an easement, we're not going to do something that the town can use, perhaps, or anybody else to say, no, you guys have to do this or do that, which was not something agreed upon for the building. So at that point, if the MWRA doesn't approve or doesn't respond, that component of how we go forward, we're willing to cooperate, we're willing to work out the details and do it all in good faith. But at that point, it's sort of a separate tied effort, but separate effort schedule wise, because the town and Attorney Dineski or anyone else, could take a year to finish an easement document. And unfortunately, I've seen that happen.
Okay, so Lori, do you have a comment on that? Or Bill, you had something? Sorry.
Yeah, so what if we take it out of the prior to construction activity and just make it a standard condition?
Yes, that is one piece that I think we would need to either bifurcate it or take it out entirely. And then I understand Lori's point about having some teeth. And again, we're agreeable and willing to work through all this. I just know when some of the technicalities of liability and maintenance come up on a trail that we would be donating for public use can get dicey and take time.
Lori, you have your hand up there?
Yeah, so the first part of this, I still think has to be prior to construction activity, because we're talking about modifying the site plan. But I'd be totally okay with shifting the second half. So I didn't anticipate that the construction of the bypass trail and the donation of the easement would happen prior to issuance of an occupancy permit. So if you want to add the design of the bypass trail to say, a later period of time, I don't know if you'd be okay with it being prior to issuance of a building permit, because chances are those will happen kind of close together within a few months, the issuance of the building permit and the start of construction. But would you be comfortable with that? Would that give you enough time, do you think?
I'm just, part of this effort is, and attorneys would probably weigh in, is looking at worst case scenarios too. So we submit this, we put it all together, and we go into the MWRA, and as they've done in the past, they take 9 months to respond to us. I don't know where that leaves us. Do we start the discussions on other alternates? Sometimes MWRA is just not focused on certain things, and then there's other issues going on, and it can take a long time. Again, we're willing to go through this effort to be cooperative. It's the timing and holding the construction project for the building tied to stuff that we can't control. We can't control the MWRA, and frankly, we can't control the town to make the town, if there's an easement dock or something like that, we can't make you guys perform in a certain time frame either.
It sounds like the only piece prior to construction is just the design piece, but then prior to the permit is really the implementation of it.
Right, it just falls under the heading of E. If you go to the very beginning of section E before the bullet points, it says everything there prior to
Oh, yes,
construction
I got
activity,
you.
the applicant shall. So again, as Lori said, we're comfortable with the obligation to depict it on the plan and to go seek the approval. We just can't we can't control the MWRA or the town to operate in a timely fashion.
Okay, so then if we took the second, so Laura, you said you'd be comfortable taking the second part out and moving it out of construction activity. Does that solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be fine with moving it prior to issuance of an occupancy permit. So you'd have to design, you'd have to construct, and you'd have to issue the easement document to, or at least offer it to the town. If it takes the town longer, then you know, if the holdup is with the town but not with you, then I think it would be perfectly reasonable for you to get your occupancy permit. It's not your fault that the town's slow.
So then,
So I can change that word to, you know, submit a 7-foot wide trail easement to the town for access and maintenance purposes.
You want me to stop sharing?
well, we still need to see it perhaps.
Very,
Bill, oh, sorry, Bill, I didn't see your hand up there. Yep.
that's okay. So I know Amy will say the same thing. Sometimes the MWRA, when we were looking at the aqueduct trail and we were asking them questions about what we could use on the top of the, trail, they can take a long time to come back to us. And I don't think it's, personally, I don't think it's, I mean, I hate to say this, but I don't think it's fair to Gutierrez that they're held up because, of this one thing from the MWRA. I think if they're working in this in good faith, then, it should just be a condition and not prior to issuance of the permit or, occupancy permit or anything, as long as they're working this in good faith.
Okay, what does the board think of that? And Lori, does that work to even take out prior to the issuance of a occupancy permit? Or you need that actually, like, how do you transverse that area?
What if it's still a condition now, just not prior to
Construction?
it's still a condition?
Well, it could just be if you don't like the change on the site plan, so they could just submit a sketch. But I'm concerned and just have that be like a condition without any sort of timing. But what if they submit the sketch to MWRA for approval a month before they're interested in getting an occupancy permit? So the idea here is to have them design and start the conversation with MWRA at the earliest possible moment. So that's why I suggested that it be included with the documents prior to construction activity. Because I understand it's going to take MWRA a long time. So the only thing that would be the requirement, and of course, once an occupancy permit is issued, that's our teeth. So we don't have any teeth anymore.
Right.
So this is the way all of the conditions, 100% of the conditions need to be complete before issuance of an occupancy permit. So, I would suggest keeping that the same. So depict the creation of the earthen ramp, that submittal should come with, prior to construction activities. But the obligation to design the bypass trail and to construct it and to offer the easement to the town, that can be prior to issuance of an occupancy permit.
Okay, so just move it out from under here. So from prior to
Correct.
issuance of an occupancy, we'd move it out. Okay. Scott,
Yes.
does that sound like if we took that bottom part out prior to issuance of a permit and moved it out of the construction part, does that help satisfy your concern?
This is all just going to put us all in a really difficult situation, because how long are we going to wait for the MWRA? Because we're not going to be able to wait very long for the MWRA, because we'll be forced to have to work out doing an alternate alignment, which I think everybody would find less desirable, less beneficial than doing some grading within the aqueduct alignment. So that's the concern, is that we're going to be forced into a situation where, because we have a deadline of trying to do something, and then again, we can submit and offer it to the town, but that's it. We can't go beyond that. We can't force the town to do something if it doesn't want to or refuses to do it for whatever reason.
Okay, does it make sense to then forget about the MWRA piece and go straight to just designing a 6-foot wide bypass trail? Or is that what you're trying to avoid? That's a worst case scenario.
Right. We're trying to avoid that because the preferred alignment is to keep, and the trail starts in the aqueduct and continues in the aqueduct, and it only has this small area where it's not technically where it's supposed to be.
Okay, so Attorney Nessie, can you think of anything that would help with that time trigger? So like if the MWRA is taking 9 months or something, or whatever that equates to, that we've got to figure out something different, or?
Madam Chair, the issue that the planning director identified of once an occupancy permit is issued, the teeth, if you will, of a condition essentially removed. One possible alternative would be prior to an occupancy permit, or a set period of time having elapsed from the submission to MWRA with no action, or something that creates a sort of outside limit that would be within the range of what might be expected if the process, as was stated, were begun as quickly as possible.
Okay, so does something like that work for the applicant?
So if I understand correctly, the idea would be we're obligated to put it on the plan, which is fine. We're obligated to make the request of MWRA, and if there is no approval within some time frame, then we go to Plan B. Essentially, we all agree upon that, and we have that approach, and then that work has to be provided, and a easement offered to the town within a certain amount of time of that date. We can live with that kind of procedure. So it gives us all collectively, I don't know what that time frame is, 9 months for the MWRA to respond. And if they don't respond, we go to Plan B, which is to identify the trail alignment that uses our parcel, and we provide an easement document to the town. Again, we can't make the town agree or proceed or do anything beyond that. We can't force.
Okay, to that point, to them not being able to force the town, is there a way to avoid that contingency then? Well,
So
no,
I
all you have to do is provide it and offer it. If the town says no, you've done what you're obligated to do.
Yeah,
It's just
that would be my suggestion, is just to change the language to offer.
Yep. So you offer it, the town says no, you're done.
And I think we all don't expect that to be the case, but
It protects you.
you know, we can't make you guys do something.
Okay, so does that make sense for everybody? And then Amy, do these this looks like minor wordsmithing. Is there anything that's not, that changes the?
Yeah, I thought it was called an access drive, but if they called the driveway, that's fine too. And I thought the aqueduct was the aqueduct. I thought the right of way was only the crossing.
We have a right of way across the aqueduct right of way. So they're both rights of way, but I see your confusion. So I think part of the wordsmithing would be to we would have to, clarify a little bit of the second half and probably take it out of E and make it its own new condition, standalone condition.
Yeah.
In the event the MWRA or something like that, the MWRA application or the MWRA will be provided 9 months to respond in the event they don't, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure the attorneys can write something good on that.
Okay. I had sent this to Lori, so then I guess you guys can work it out. Should I stop sharing now?
You have another one here or no? You may as well keep going because we gotta go through this anyway. Okay, the next one is, okay, so Lori added the text in red.
Mm-hmm.
So anything here from either side? Okay, so that looks okay. The next one is is this the landscape buffer? Okay, so Amy, you had an edit there. So you had an edit that said total height 14 feet and I had a similar edit just said in a different way. So it doesn't matter to me. I just said a minimum of 14 feet. So my point, and it sounds like your point too, was to just make sure we specify in total, whatever it may be, it would at least reach that height.
Yep. That's what I was trying to get at.
Okay. And then you had fencing materials reviewed prior to certificate of occupancy. So thoughts here, so go ahead, thoughts here.
Well, I just put that there because of what I mentioned before, like when we do the drainage system and everything on the site plan, we have the specs for what's going to be installed. So there's no questions later. And so as long as there's specs on the site plan of what type of fencing that's going to be.
I'd suggest that the fencing material be subject to submittal and approval by the planning director and the town engineer. I think some level of both speed of decision-making and expertise would be appropriate.
As long as we make sure what the board wants to see matches what they're thinking.
Well, it's a 7-foot tall solid fence on top of a 7-foot berm. It's not very confusing.
Right. Well, no, Manny had said, the 5 or 10 dBs that it should be. I didn't know what the board thought of that. That was a comment that we just heard. That the fencing has to be of a certain caliber, that it stops a certain percentage of the sound.
Yeah, so for me, I don't mind if it goes to Lori and Fred, but I do want to make sure that it's something that isn't, I don't know, is it, as we said, I think it says solid up there. At some point we called it impervious. That's 1/2 dozen, I guess. But the point would be to block sound. So obviously we don't want there to be slats with holes, or I guess it says solid, so that covers that.
Mm-hmm. And I probably don't have to have prior to certificate of occupancy because that's already at the top, right? Prior to construction.
Okay, does this seem reasonable then?
Yep. I'd
Um,
actually rather see it on the site plan before we sign off on the decision.
It already says though that the town and the engineer and the planning director will review it, so it's kind of redundant to put it back in there. It says in the very beginning of this whole section.
Yep.
Oh, okay,
And it is modify the site plan, so.
okay.
I just wanted some note that the fencing materials shall be reviewed and accepted. So it's, so, you know, so the board and the planning director has an idea, like you said.
So my expectation is that they would show the location of the fence. So that's why I said that they're gonna modify the site plan. So
Mhm.
my expectation is they're gonna show the specific location with the curve
Mhm.
of the fence. And then they're gonna include a detail showing what the fence is gonna look like.
Right, or the materials used.
Yeah, it's, you know, in the details in the back of the site plan, they'll show
Right.
the height of the fence and the design of it. And they'll explain whether it's gonna be vinyl or wood, you know, what it's gonna be made out of.
Okay.
Do we
I
want,
have,
well, I'm just wondering, like, do we just want to make it clear the intent of the fence or something like fencing materials shall be selected, you know, these aren't the right words, but to just reflect the intent of sound abatement, so it's something to that effect. The one thing that concerns me is that we just end up with a fence that doesn't stop any sound at all or minimal. So I just want just to be conscious of the materials actually being a sound barrier to some extent is what my concern would be.
Actually, in Janine's letter, she noted some companies, and there was one company that's been used in the United States. They could use the same company or one similar. And it was used for a sound wall, it looked vinyl between residential neighborhood.
I mean, I don't care. To me, it doesn't matter who the company is. I just want whatever was selected really just reflects the intent of why we're doing this. So it's not just a check the box. It's really mindful of the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Thoughts on that?
I totally agree.
I do too.
Not sure how we should word that.
Maybe those might not be the right words. I'm just those, something could be wordsmithed there.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may, a couple of points on this, and we have a couple of wordsmithing edits that we can submit over to Lori as well, so she can work those in. We could probably revise that reference sketch dated March 17th, so it shows the curve or how the fence gets extended, so we have that and can reference that update. There is one area where you guys are asking for the fence to be extended to get it closer to the building, the edge of the building, where we do not have a 7-foot high berm in that area, and the fence and the berm, therefore, if we have a 7-foot fence, the fence would be dropping down as it gets closer to the building. The rest of the area is a slope, technically probably not a berm if you ask Dave Robinson, but it's because the parking lot is cut down. There's higher than 7-foot slope in some places. So we're good with that, but as you get close to the building, it may not be 7 on top of 7. And there's no way to do that because we have to maintain fire access, which is at grade. They can't go up and over.
Oh yeah, so that one little spot at the end.
Right. It's right at the end there where it would drop down.
Yeah. And I'll reiterate, looking at that one spot, it's really pointing straight north toward the athletic fields of the high school. It's not really shining into the residential neighborhoods. Those are more due west.
And we're removing parking spaces there, but we're going to extend the fence and we understand that. And I think the other piece that you're looking for, because we've spoken to our construction crew as well, is sound dampening.
Okay.
Nothing eliminates all sound. Nothing. It's all a range of dampening. And I think that what was mentioned earlier about the 10 decibel levels, there's something called STC ratings. I'm not exactly sure what STC stands for, but if you get an STC rating of 10, that would be a reduction of 10 decibels in levels of sound. And just to go back to decibels, something that is 10 decibels louder than something else is twice as loud, because it's a logarithmic scale or something like that. So that is usually what we would want to achieve, is the STC rating of 10, sound dampening. We understand it's a solid panel fence. Sometimes it may be solid with sound dampening foam inside of the fence, and that's how you achieve it.
Okay, great. So are you just looking for language that covers that last little piece? Is that what you're concerned is missing from this part? Is that, you brought it up, I'm wondering, is it missing from here? So the curve, it shall be extended to the curve along the edge. Is there something like an exclude? So from that part, it sounds like it's going to go down. So the minimum won't be 14 there.
So that's the only thing that I wanted to be clear about, is that the entire length of it, at the end, it would be this. We will have the 7 foot high, and it's not always a berm, which implies you've done this, you've gone up and gone down. We have this kind of situation where our parking lot is down here, and then we have a slope and the fence will be on top, but what goes on after that is not necessarily back down. It is eventually as you get towards the stream, but
Okay, but so when you add it all together, whether berm or fence, there would just be a minimum of 14 up till you get to the curve. And once you get to the curve, it's got to come down just by way of the fire department. Okay, so I think that's the expectation in my mind. Do board members, is that what board members understand the case to be too?
Yes.
How many feet from the building is it? Is it like a 10 foot or is it like 100 feet?
I don't know. What we can do is, as I mentioned, rather than having this description, we'll update the reference sketch and we can give you that distance. I would say it's more than 10 and less than 100. It's probably something on the lines of like 30, 35 feet. Israel, I see you.
Like
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably a little bit wider than the 3 parking spaces that we're going to remove there. So 3 parking spaces are 9 feet wide. So, somewhere between 27 and, 35 feet.
I think that's important to know because that's a big gap. That's a big sound gap and a big lighting gap. And what if you followed the curve of the slope around the back of the basin? So you're not blocking the access way for the fire chief, but the fence will curve along the back of the basin and still block the lights.
Well, we are talking about following the curve on the closer to the building, and putting in a gate for access, for maintenance access, not for the fire department side, and trying to get it past the building edge. If you go to the downside of the basin, the far side of the basin, you're actually downhill further.
Right.
So we're trying to keep it uphill further to keep it at a higher level.
Right. But it sounds like there's going to be a 35-foot gap.
No.
No.
35-foot length where the fence is not sitting on top of the 7-foot slope.
So it's only like 7 feet high versus 14.
So the gap is exactly the gap. The gap is where the fire department access is, which is going to be around the edge of the building. We can probably.
Yeah, I guess it would be good to see how many feet it is and what it looks like if you can send that to us.
Yep. So we can update the sketch so you have it. We're not talking about a gap in the fence, so to speak. It's just a limit where the fence is not sitting on top of a slope.
Okay. That sounds consistent with what we talked about last time. Does anyone feel differently?
Yeah, except for it's gonna drop from 14 feet to 7 right there for like 35 feet. And that's the area. Is there any way you can show where those, it's gonna be pointing?
Show where it's going to be pointing. What do you mean by
So
that?
if you're not gonna get rid of all the parking spaces there, if someone parks there, kind of like how we got the picture from Manny, that would show where those lights are gonna shine. Are they gonna point, you say maybe the athletic fields? Can you just show that on a map so we know for sure?
They'll be blocked. They'll be blocked by a fence. It's not, there will be no gap for lights or headlights shining. If you're talking about car lights shining,
Mhm.
there'll be no gap in the fence or the area that's being blocked by that.
Okay.
Okay, so the next one, it looks like Amy, you just added resistant, salt resistant.
Deer resistant evergreen trees. I actually talked to Dave Varon, who's on our design review, and he mentioned that you'd want salt resistant, deer resistant evergreen trees.
Um,
I mean, there's some, like, I think he gave a couple ideas of the pines or the spruces.
yeah, we were looking to update again, to update the sketch so that it clearly shows the number and locations, and then that'll get added to the plan so that you can see that. And we were looking to put in native and drought tolerant, which is what are the typical requirements. I don't know what a deer resistant evergreen tree is, and I don't know what deer go after, but we can certainly.
I guess the one you pick, if you just, I know Google knows everything. You can Google it, the tree that you pick. I tried a couple, and there are some that the deer really like, and there are some that they don't.
Yeah, I think we'd rely on Dave and his team. He's got landscape architects in there, and to be able to, find some trees that, I mean, as we talked about, we want some that are going to be fast growing, that are full bodied and.
Right.
Is Dave your guy? Is Dave Aaron your landscape architect?
Dave Robinson.
Oh, Dave Robinson. Okay.
Has landscape architects on the team.
Oh, got it. I thought you meant Dave Aaron. Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. The other one goes towards the plantings too, so I'm sure they'll show that on the plan.
Okay. So I had in the next section, what I did. So Lori, I put a comment in the last version you sent that these two got combined, but so when we last talked, it sounded like Fred, you were saying, we talked about how this original one. So Amy, actually, I'll share for a minute.
Sure.
Okay. So I thought this was the original one. Can everybody see this? Submit analysis by technically qualified expert. Am I sharing the right one? Okay. So this is what is explicit in our groundwater special permit, which Fred, I thought, and feel free to correct or jump in, Fred. So I didn't think it made sense to change that. And then I went back and listened to the discussion and just like tried to grab some of the language that Scott had said about the secondary part, which is really just like getting an opinion on whether or not anything else needs to be done. And if so, do it at whatever needs to be done and follow state the MCP and LSP recommendation. So I tried to, we can wordsmith this. I just basically tried to listen to what Scott said last time and put it in one paragraph. But I did think that this needed to be a separate component still. Fred, did I misunderstand when we talked last time that that's still part of the special permit?
That's part of the application requirements for anybody applying for a special permit. And typically, what happens is the engineer who does the drainage analysis evaluates the drainage and supplies that statement at the time of the application. And I believe that was done originally when they went to the Groundwater Advisory Committee a couple of years ago. So
Okay.
that's why I was thinking it wasn't necessary anymore because it's already been dealt with.
So this was the application, I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it was actually the other one I was thinking of, that they didn't have this, but maybe I'm incorrect. If you have it on file, obviously you're correct, but.
Typically, that's one of the things that I evaluate when I first do my review memo for the groundwater committee. Did they meet all the requirements of the special permit application process? And if they didn't provide this statement, I would indicate to the groundwater committee that they should recommend their comments to the SPGA that they get that, or that the applicant provided to the groundwater committee before going to the SPGA. So it's really just about the drainage system, the engineer who does the drainage design certifying that what they're proposing to do will meet the standards, and he can certify to this. The second part of what you're looking for has to do more with what you're talking about that's in the soil and might be stirred up as part of the construction process. So they're really completely different. The first one, I believe, was dealt with at the time that the application was originally made. I believe David Robinson had submitted it with his stormwater analysis and his complete design.
Okay, so fine, then they either could be merged or we could, I think the previous version just had submitted analysis by an LSP certifying quality, and then just brought in that secondary part. So this would go back to being merged. I just pulled them apart because I thought from our last conversation that needed to be done. But it sounds like that was incorrect.
It's to me, that first statement that you have there doesn't need to be there.
Got it.
The second, because the LSP is not the one that provides that first statement by a technically qualified expert. That's the PE who does the drainage design.
Okay, so say that just doesn't exist, period. It's already been done.
Okay.
Okay, so then this is, Scott, where I took what you had said last time and tried to just like record it down, and maybe we wordsmith from here, but this is what we talked about last time.
We're not a long way in concept apart. We've got some suggestions, but we can take those offline, I think, more effectively.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know if anyone else had anything. Looks like nothing going on until we change this language. We talked about just making water trucks shall be available as required. That just protected the applicant from always having one. But if we needed one, there it would be available. Looks like nothing else. We talked about the building settling on earth tones. Was this one I think we talked about two sides, and Scott, you were thinking about that. Did that still make sense to you?
Yeah, we can live with that. Yes.
I don't think we had, oh, okay, so then we went back and forth. I think this was 25, it just scooted down to 20. I think we went back and forth. The board had talked about 10. Scott, you talked about 25. It's not a full meet in the middle, it's just a little bit down. I don't know, thoughts on this one?
Well, our thought on this is that the 25 is more of the industry standard and is more typical of how you would see this in other locations. It is based on ITE and as we talked, I think I talked a little bit about, daily variations and variability in traffic volumes. We think 25% makes sense. I appreciate the idea of trying to, meet somewhere in the middle and recognize this is, closer to 25 than the 10 that was proposed, but we think the 25, is the right range, just given, what you're evaluating and how you're evaluating it.
Lori, did you pick 20 just as a peace offering point, or what were you thinking? Any logic behind it?
Exactly. It was a peace offering. I think Millie threw out that number. So I figured that there was at least one member thought that 20% was the appropriate number. So I decided to go with it and see what you folks thought.
Okay, board members' thoughts on this one?
I think it's just a number that's gonna be so hard to, really nail down anyways. I think you just gotta pick something that seems reasonable.
And
Okay.
I will add, I know you're asking for board member input, but I think Lori, you said your experience and what you've seen elsewhere also had, not to put you on the spot, also had the 25% in other cases.
Yes, that was the number that I had originally proposed.
Okay,
Holliston had no number, said if it goes above the numbers in their traffic report, then the applicant will actually pay the town for enforcement. So they stick to the numbers that they brought forth.
I think that's unreasonable because
Yeah,
there
I'm not
are
asking
so
you.
many fluctuations on a daily basis.
I wasn't asking to do that, but I was just saying that's what I saw in another town. Not that, I didn't see all of them at 25%. So I think every town picks what they think is good for their town.
Given the traffic issues in that area, I'm not exactly thrilled, even coming up from 10%, to be honest, but I don't see that 5% is really going to kill us one way or the other.
meaning 25 is okay with you?
Yeah. If that's what we need to do, yeah.
Anthony, anything from you? Thoughts?
I think, I don't know, I'd probably stick with the 20%.
Amy, thoughts from you, or Millie? Millie, you put out the 20% in the first place. Was that your suggestion?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I felt that 25 was on the high side of being, if you're overestimating or underestimating by 25%, it's a lot. I think 20% is a reasonable set point to begin to look at if there's something that we need to do before there are serious problems.
I'd only point out just in relation to the baseline, the VHB report, which talks in terms of 43 trips in the morning peak and 46 in the evening. That's a pretty minor increase at 20%, to all of a sudden say that that's going to trigger a financial obligation in some fashion. So, I think in focusing on the source of the traffic that's usually the concern, the peak hours, we're dealing with relatively small numbers. So percentages mean a relatively small change in flow.
Okay, so that's a good point then. If you do calculate that, we're talking the difference between 2 trucks or whatever, say it's trucks. So it's either 11 trucks or 9 trucks.
And
So,
it's not all trucks, just to be clear. It's passenger vehicles too.
oh, okay. So, I mean, I guess to that point, does the 5% really matter all that much to us? Unless we're gonna go way down to 10%. It seems.
I sort of have a question to that. So you have, if I'm correct, how many parking spots are in this facility, are going to be in this warehouse?
150, right?
150.
Correct.
So even, I think at one point you actually stated that, going down to 100 would not be feasible for this size facility. So if you think that your peak is going to be 48, if you've got 100 parking spots that you think it's not feasible to go below, you're already at 50% traffic.
Madam Chair,
What?
if I may.
Go ahead, Scott.
Again, and people generally do this all the time. You're equating traffic counts with parking spots, and the two are not exactly the same. What Attorney Donahue was talking about is the peak hour of traffic. Everybody doesn't go to work at the same time, even in a warehouse environment. Even if it is an 8 to 5 kind of thing, the arrivals and departures spread out over time. And so what you look at, while looking at like the school down the road, most everyone arrives in the same hour for students, but some of the teachers are there earlier. And then at the end of the day, you have that span where people are, leaving right after school, staying later and the like. So you get a span of time where people arrive and depart. And that's not all, you don't have 150 spaces. This isn't a punch clock time environment that everybody leaves all at once or arrives all at once.
Okay, does that answer your question, Bill?
Not really, because again, you don't know what your site is going to do. If your site is an 8 to 5 site, we were talking about this earlier. If your site is an 8 to 5 site, then guess what? Everyone's coming in between 7:30 and 8:30, right? So you're filling up 100 spots between 7:30 and 8:30. That's your peak hour.
And if that ends up being the exact condition that arrives, then we're going to have a problem with the traffic counts then.
Mm-hmm.
So again, then I don't understand the difference between 20% and 25% when you're already at 50.
Well, the 20 and 25% difference is just the variation on a day-to-day basis, and especially as Attorney Donahue was talking about the small number of vehicles that you're talking about, the difference of 2-3 vehicles may trip one way or the other. If we have a situation where we're 100% off is what you're thinking about in your head, then we're off either way, whether it's 20 or 25% is the limits that are shown here.
So then what do the traffic counts really mean? Because if we're off by 50%, you pay your $20,000 and then we're off and everything we made our decision on really didn't have good numbers.
The point is that they're not off, that in nearly all situations, and this is why the experience is what it is, it's not the case where you have everybody arriving for a one-time set, start of the day. Even in, if you look down the street at the 301 Bartlett, even if they are operating on a defined time, everyone doesn't roll in at the same time in the morning or leave at the same time in the evening.
Okay, so Bill, along the lines of what you're asking, does that change what you think about the percentage, or?
It does a little bit. Like I said, I was willing to give 5% for 2 vehicles, but it brings up a concern that I didn't have previously.
So what percent then now is in your head?
Well, I don't think it matters, to be honest. If the traffic study says 40 and, Mr. Donahue is stating that, they can't go under 100 spots, even if 50% of those people show up at within 1 hour, which is completely reasonable, you're over your numbers. You're over the numbers that you've stated are going to be for this facility. And that's a concern. That's a concern in this area. That is a huge concern in this area, because you've got the high school right down the street. And if their starting time is anywhere near the time of the high school, you're adding a ton of traffic to an area that already has a lot of traffic.
Well, through you, Madam Chair, recall that the study we're referring to is based upon the Institute of Traffic Engineers, which is looking at a universe of warehouse type uses in any number of geographical areas, not necessarily next to a high school or anything else, and saying on a typical warehouse, this is the typical flow. You're asking basically for some level of assurance that this will remain typical without any kind of atypical. And that's not necessarily true. But when we're talking about when we're going to contribute more, if the impact is more than we anticipated, then The variation is going to be based most particularly on the AM and PM peak, because that's the impact. Recall that the measurement we're taking is at the driveway. It's not Bartlett Street. The impact's going to be during the peak hours. Vehicles coming and going at 11 o'clock in the morning are going to be a difference without a distinction on Bartlett Street. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. All of that data indicates for a typical warehouse of this size, given this type of use, you've got about 46 vehicles. Could you end up with 50? Sure. We're just saying that maybe 50 shouldn't require a payment when, frankly, you'd have to be a traffic engineer to know that it's 50 instead of 46, because nobody's going to notice that in the typical flow, remembering that we're talking about the peak times. So, but, you know, I don't want to belabor it too much. I mean, we made good progress. That's the reason why I think the 25, it is the MassDOT standard. To the extent MassDOT requires post-occupancy monitoring, which it does in a number of scenarios, that's the standard we're all used to. I think it has that practice there. I think it works for this type of warehouse, given what we're talking about.
Amy, you have something there?
And what is the standard mitigation if it goes above this number? Like 20% is nothing. Like if you're now at 150 cars in the morning, you pay your $20,000 and that's it. I don't know. Like you're saying that the post occupancy study is standard at 25, but paying the 20,000 isn't going to fix anything. I guess it was just an arbitrary number for, I don't know what we'd do with it. I guess it's
I'm sure you'll put it to good use. It's the board's recommendation. It's been out there. It's what we've agreed to.
I know,
We're talking
but
about when it's triggered. I'm not going to go backwards and talk about whether traffic's even relevant for an as of right use. So
If I may,
let's move on. Sorry.
I guess we'll have to hire a crossing guard.
Yeah,
Israel, you had something there?
yeah, I just wanted to kind of point out the kind of the double-edged swordedness of using anecdotal experience for these kinds of situations, because I know that it's also been said during the course of the hearings that, you know, the 301 Bartlett parking lot is empty all the time, and yet, you know, the same sort of rationale and thinking behind the amount of parking that was necessary for that location is going into this one. So I think my point is just simply that whether a parking lot is empty or not, or how many parking spaces are in the parking lot isn't, you know, necessarily correlated with what the ITE numbers, you know, generate. And so that's my only point.
Got it. Okay, so
I just have a quick question. We do have a bylaw that says you can have reserve parking. So I'm just hoping if you don't need it with your warehouse, you don't build it, because it is a priority habitat area. So it'd be great not to pave 150 spaces if you're only going to need 46 per shift.
Fair point.
okay, so it sounds like 25 is the standard out there. The difference between 20 and 25 is not extensive, and the parking lot issue that you mentioned, Bill, maybe sounds like it's a separate issue that can't necessarily be resolved with this condition, because that would just make the percentage ridiculous. I think you're pointing out a problem with the condition in general that we sort of passed by in a way.
Yeah.
So do we want to stick with, does the 25 as a standard make sense, or?
Yeah, I think if it's just a difference of 2, then yeah, 25.
Anyone feel strongly that 20 must be the number, or?
I mean, I'm okay with 25. I just prefer to set something off a little bit sooner, but it's not huge.
Anthony, thoughts from you?
I think to Bill's point, it doesn't really, the count doesn't change that dramatically or almost at all. So I think I'd be okay with it.
Okay, Amy,
Yeah, I mean, it's fine.
okay. So why don't we keep it then at the 25? And then I think that concluded that whole area. The next part was really just what we talked about tonight. Any other further comments? The applicant, you mentioned you had some edits, but that's something you're just going to send to Laurie. It was just wordsmithing for the most part.
Yeah, and we talked about in general some concepts this evening that we can certainly caucus with Attorney Dineski and see if we can at least get something that we agree. You can then, Laurie can then share with the board some fashion.
Okay. All right. I mean, it feels like overall we're trying to work towards something that makes sense for both sides. So I think that's good to end with. Oh, actually, I do. I will, because we started a whole nother section, I will take any additional public comments at this time if there are any. I don't see any additional comments. Okay, so let's see. We have to think about continuing. And Anthony, you are not at the next planning board meeting.
Correct.
Okay. So. And then Attorney Dineski, is what if we plan to just wordsmith conditions that have already been discussed at the next meeting? Say we did that on the 4th. Would Anthony need to be present for that to participate in the vote? Or is it because we're kind of doing an administrative type wordsmithing exercise, that would be okay?
In my view, he would need to be present for any session of the board with respect to this application in order to be a voting member.
Okay. So that would put us on April 18th to come back and wrap this up. Does
I
that
can accommodate him right at 6 o'clock.
accommodate right at 6? It's also tax day. Does that work?
Sure, works for us.
Okay. So we will plan on April 18th at 6 p.m. So is there a motion to continue the public hearing for the property known as 0 Bartlett and 301 Bartlett Street, Parcel H for site plan approval on groundwater protection overlay district special permit to April 18th at 6 p.m.
So moved.
Second,
Second,
all in favor, Bill,
aye.
Anthony,
Aye.
Billy,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
and Carrie's an aye. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. And then board members stay on because we have to talk. We just have a couple of old business items.
Thank you all. We appreciate your time and effort.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
as well.
Thank you.
We have consideration of minutes from February 7th and February 21st. Are we prepared to do those? Is the board prepared to do that tonight, or did everyone read the minutes from the 7th?
Yep,
Yeah.
I did.
Okay. I think, Lori, did you send out some proposed amendments? Modified minutes, not from the 7th, only the 21st.
She sent out both, because
Oh,
I had amendments for both and she sent them both.
Yep, sorry. Oh, I see. Sorry, you said, sorry, let's try that again. I meant to send the 7th. Okay, subject line just so the 21st, but yep, they're there. Okay, are there any additional amendments to the minutes?
For the February 7th one, I don't know if you can pull that up on the screen. I don't know how to do that. But on page 5, it talks about the cleaning out the drains or the, oh, what do they call those things?
Hold on, I can share them. Okay, so page 5.
Yeah, so it's top of the if you go to the top of the page, they're talking about sediment in the drains is 3 inches. And the last, they're talking about increasing it to 3 inches instead of doing it every 1 inch.
Mhm.
The last sentence basically says, Ms. Marnett would like to see if Mark Bartlett had any issues with reducing it to 3 inches. I think it's supposed to be increasing it to 3 inches.
Oh, okay.
Because they were saying to clear it every inch,
Yep.
but that seemed unreasonable. So I think it was supposed to be increasing it to every 3 inches.
It may have been, I'm sorry, Carrie, it's Fred. It may have been revising it to 3 inches.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. Lori, do you want me to track these or are you writing it down?
I'm writing it down.
Okay, so it's just revising. Thanks for catching that. Okay, any other edits to the minutes, amendments?
Go ahead.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the minutes from February 7th as amended?
A
So
second.
moved.
Oh,
Second?
second.
Okay, all in
Sorry.
favor, Bill,
Aye.
Anthony,
Aye.
Billy,
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
And carries an aye. Okay, minutes for February 21st. Did everyone have a chance to read them?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So there were amendments submitted. Are there any, obviously, discussion on those amendments or further amendments to the minutes to the 21st?
I did not have any.
Okay, motion to accept the February 21st minutes as amended.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor, Bill,
Aye.
Anthony,
Aye.
Billy,
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Carries an aye. I just wanted to thank Melanie Rich for pulling these minutes together. I think February was a bear and she really did a nice job. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Let's see, next planning board meeting is April 4th and then we have the 18th, obviously. Oh, shoot. So Anthony won't be here on the 4th. We have 4:55. So Lori, do you have a sense?
Yeah, I did reach out to Brian Falk and I explained that Anthony won't be able to attend on the 4th. And he said that he was going to check with his client to see if he wanted to continue to a future meeting or whether he wanted to go forward on the 4th. So he hasn't gotten back to me yet. We do have to meet regardless, just to continue the public hearing to a future date. There is the possibility that we could go over the presentation for town meeting. I have started to work on those slides. So that's something we could talk about. Or of course, we could do that on the 18th too, if you'd prefer.
Anthony, do you prefer we do that when you're not here so we can assign all of the bylaw presentations to you?
Yeah. I'm good away.
Okay, maybe we put on the agenda for next time. So at least if we're going to bother to get together, we can hash through that and be done with it because the 18th will be busy with Bartlett anyway. And then for 4:55, do they need that variance? Did we find out or no?
I haven't heard from Dave Dineski yet. Actually,
Oh.
Dave's still on, so he
Oh.
might have an update.
Attorney Dineski, do they need a variance or?
Yes, question as I understood, after Laurie spoke with Attorney Falk, he commented that he was going to present something in writing on the issue. And so I wanted to see what he was going to submit before I provided anything to the board so that we wouldn't have a ping pong effect.
Okay, that's fine. So we don't really know, but either way, we're gonna find out if they want to continue. They may, so they could full well opt to move ahead on the 4th and not have Anthony vote on the project. That's their call.
Correct. It would just be a unanimous vote of the remaining members.
Okay. All right, well then I think with that, unless there's any other business, is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all in favor, Bill,
Aye.
Anthony,
Aye.
Billy,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
and carries an aye.